Aloha. Welcome to the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum Education Webinar Series, where we discover and investigate a range of topics, including aviation, aeronautic innovation, World War II Pacific Theater history, and so much more. My name is William Spincola. I'm the Senior Education Manager here at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, and I'll be your moderator today. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Our museum is located in the state of Hawaii, on historic Ford Island, right in the very center of famous Pearl Harbor, on the island of Oahu. It is our museum's mission to steward the history of America's first aviation battlefield of World War II. Today, we'll be discussing a little-known history regarding the continued effort of Imperial Japanese forces to conduct offensive operations in Hawaii after the December 7th, 1941 attack. Our conversation today will be about Operation K, the third attack on Pearl Harbor. I know everyone's saying, what are you talking about? So if you remember a previous webinar we had, the first attack is, according to us here at the museum, is 1932 United States Navy Fleet Problem 13 with Admiral Yarnell and the simulated attack on Pearl Harbor during that fleet problem. Of course, the actual attack on Pearl Harbor by Imperial Japanese forces on December 7th, 1941. And the second follow-up attack that happened in March of 1942 that few people know about. So joining us today, we have an expert. Joining us today is one of our esteemed docents here at Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, Scott Mensen. Scott is a retired United States Navy Senior Chief. He is a highly experienced flight engineer with lots of hours and time experiences in a P-3 Orion aircraft. And he has had a career with Hawaiian Airlines as well. He's a very accomplished historical researcher. He's a good friend, and we're proud to have him on board. He is our expert today. Scott, thank you so much for being with us. Welcome aboard tonight.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to get right into our program. For those also who are joining us, we're live at 1800 hours Hawaii Standard Time today, and this program will be posted on our museum website as well as on YouTube later on next week for those who want to see it again. All right, so Operation K. In a quick overview, Scott, what is Operation K? What is this second attack?
Well, this was an attempt for the Imperial Japanese Navy to gather some reconnaissance information on on how things were progressing at Pearl Harbor, and also to possibly do some damage to the 1010 dock, and probably more specifically the dry dock that was associated that was at the end of the 1010 dock.
So the primary mission then seems like it was BDA, bomb damage assessment post-strike. Were they also interested in maybe where those carriers were?
Yeah, they probably were interested in the location of the carriers, because at that time, really the only way that they would have known where carriers were from radio transmissions that they could triangulate.
All right. So now, and this operation is conducted with a flying boat. So can we talk a little bit about that? That's very unique.
Yeah, the aircraft that was used was the H-8K-1 Emily, which was a very large flying boat, and it was also pretty well armed. Had a number of different guns on the aircraft. Again, it was strictly a flying boat. It was not an amphibious aircraft, and it was new to their fleet. As a matter of fact, the aircraft that were used were supplementary prototypes. They had only built just a few of these aircraft at the time of this mission.
Very good. And they were built by Kawanishi, a company. They kind of specialized in flying boats, didn't they?
Correct. Kawanishi in Kobe, Japan is where this aircraft was built, at the Kawanishi factory.
And what are some of the and so for 1941-42, it's a brand new aircraft. So you were saying that for the mission that they had to use the pre-production prototype aircraft.
Correct. Yeah.
What's special about the Emily? What makes it unique?
I think the fact that it was very well armed, and it had a very, very long range capability. So I think those were, and it apparently the design of the hull made it a very efficient flying boat.
Very good. From what I did some quick some research on it, it had well, it had a big long range. I think it'd do something like 3,800 nautical miles, something like that. It was
Yeah, I think that's about right. I believe the prototypes were likely a little bit lesser range than the later versions. They had a smaller, I should say, a lower horsepower engine in the initial aircraft that were built, and then the later aircraft they increased the horsepower considerably on the engine. So may have possibly, I don't know if that would have increased the range, but may have.
okay. And we talked about before the program, you and I talked about defensive armament on the Emily. What was that?
It had, I believe, two 20-millimeter cannons and four 7.7 millimeter machine guns. It also had the capability of carrying up to two torpedoes, as well as 16 132-pound bombs and up to 8 550-pound or 250 kilogram bombs.
That's pretty significant. That's 4,400-pound ordnance payload, and they obviously
Yeah,
create them on
yeah.
pylons under the wings.
Correct. Yeah, so obviously there would not have been a bomb bay since it was a flying boat. Everything would have been from hard points on the wings. And it also had a pretty unique fuel system. It had a fuel system that if fuel were to leak from the tanks, it would go into the bilges and they could pump it back up into alternate tanks. Kind of a unique system that they had.
Wow, that's a very, very well thought up. So
Yeah.
Kawanishi definitely put a lot of effort into this aircraft. So it's a high-tech, high-performance, cutting-edge military true flying boat. It's not an amphibian. We have an image here. We have an image that's sitting on its docking wheels there, right? That's those are not landing gears. So those are bogey wheels that get put under the aircraft when it comes out of the water up on the ramp.
Yeah, yeah. So what's the way they typically did this with, and this was not unique to the Emily, but was true in seaplanes that we had in the U.S. military. If you can see on the landing gear, there's kind of a box type affair there. That's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
actually a float.
Oh,
So because the landing gear is very heavy, that box is just to float the gear out to the aircraft and then install it from there. Because otherwise it would simply just sink if they.
Yeah. So it's not like a volute spring on a tank. So that's actually a float to help get the wheel out.
Exactly. And that was again not unique to the Emily. That was typical of flying boats. Like the early Catalinas had something similar to that.
Very good. Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, in our research, all our photographs show the Emily here later in the war in its Imperial Navy green camouflage. But the research that we were able to uncover, the two prototypes, Y1 and Y2, were finished in silver. The tops of the wing were that Imperial Navy green, and the bottom of the wing and the belly of the aircraft were matte black. So very, very interesting, striking colors on those prototypes. So can you then, as we talked about this awesome airplane, so obviously they have this aircraft that has super long range, and they have this need for reconnaissance in Hawaii post December 7th. So can you give us a quick overview of the Operation K's scheme of maneuver? Like, what was the general plan?
So the plan was they departed out of Yokohama and flew the aircraft, out of I guess Kobe, and flew the aircraft down to island hop down to initially Saipan and then to Truk and then down to Joliet Island or Joliet Atoll, which was a Japanese seaplane base at the time. And they spent a couple of days there, I believe, with maybe had flown a training mission or two, waiting the correct time to depart on this planned mission, Operation K. And then when they were ready for that, they repositioned the aircraft at Wochi Atoll to depart out of Wochi Atoll.
So all of this is down in the Marshalls. Kwajalein seems to be the main principal island where administration is going on, and then they're operating out of the other two atolls. And when they're in the Marshalls, then they come under the command or the operational command and control of the Fourth Fleet, and that was the South Seas Fleet. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the Fourth Air Fleet was who they were flying for.
And then for the operation as well, it was going to require we'll talk about that. So the seaplane tender would probably be used, but they don't deploy a seaplane tender on the mission. What do they use?
So they just flew the aircraft out of the atolls there, to the best of my knowledge. I'm not however, they did use submarines to initially reconnoiter a good place to land and refuel the aircraft, because they didn't have, with carrying the 550-pound bombs with the weight capacity of the aircraft and the fuel that could be loaded within the maximum gross weight of the aircraft. They didn't have the range to fly all the way to Hawaii and back. So they reconnoitered with submarine I-22 to find a location. They decided on using French frigate shoals, which is part of the Hawaiian island chain, to reconnoiter, to land and refuel the aircraft. And so they used the Type B-1 submarine because that was a submarine that carried a seaplane, and they typically carried the E-14 Yokosuka Glenn, which is a single engine biplane for scouting purposes primarily. And so it had a watertight hangar on the submarine. And so for this mission, initially after they had decided on using French frigate shoals, there were several other submarines that were included. So which included the I-9, which was positioned halfway between Wochi and French frigate shoals for navigational purposes. And then the I-15 and the I-19, as well as the I-26, were sent to French frigate shoals. Primarily the I-15 and I-19 for refueling, and an I-26 was standing by. And so they had offloaded their seaplanes in Kwajalein, and they had loaded 6 fuel tanks in the hangar bays of the 3 submarines, I-19, I-15, and I-26. And so that was what they used to refuel the aircraft once the aircraft arrived at French frigate shoals, and the submarines were standing by there for that refueling operation.
And I read somewhere where each aircraft took something like over 3,000 gallons of fuel. So they had something like 10 tons of fuel with them for this mission.
Yeah.
So then the Sixth Fleet, Imperial Navy Sixth Fleet, is the submarine force. So they're involved too with all these submarines involved in the mission, although it goes back to the Fourth Air Fleet. Now, our Y-1, Y-2 aircraft are still prototype aircraft coming out of the Naval Flight Test Center in Yokohama. Is that correct? Or Yokosuka?
Yes, that's correct. So
Right.
I believe they're Yokosuka. Yeah, I think that's probably right. Yeah.
And who is our commander of this very intrepid endeavor?
As far as the aircraft commanders,
Yeah.
So the Y-71 was flown by Lieutenant Hisao Hashizuma, and Y-72 was flown by Ensign Shosuka Sasao.
Yeah, and they were highly experienced flying boat pilots, patrol pilots, and had worked on getting the Maven, an older flying boat, operational. And so they had done everything you could do with these flying boats, I understand. So they were very
correct. Yeah, particularly Lieutenant Hashizuma.
She's a very interesting character, very interesting. So French frigate shoals then is the designated fueling stop. We have our Hawaiian map here. So we all know we have 8 principal islands of the Hawaiian archipelago. I know the 9th island's Las Vegas, but that's not on our map here. So our 8 principal islands, but the Hawaiian archipelago itself, the greater Hawaiian island chain, extends north all the way to Krua Alto, to Midway. And there's lots of islets and coral heads, and it's a very impressive piece of geography of the Pacific Ocean. And so we had pictures of French frigate Shawls. There's not much to it, right? French frigate Shawls is
No,
actually just a submerged archipelago, and with the semi-protected bay in the middle of it.
correct.
Okay, so then when does the mission launch? What is
So
it's in March?
about a little, as far as I'll refer to everything in Hawaii time, but a
Okay.
little bit before 5 o'clock in the morning, they departed out of Wochi for that 1,850 statute mile trip up to French frigate Shoals. They got into French frigate Shoals about 1830 or so is when they arrived up there for their refueling operation. However, the weather was not good at French frigate Shoals. It was kind of rough seas at the time. And so they did have some difficulty with mooring lines breaking as they were doing their refueling operation, but they were successful in getting both of the aircraft refueled.
Okay. And they flew in daylight, I believe, and they did refueling towards sunset. So then
Correct. Yeah.
so the sun sets on that day, and then they launched their mission that
Yeah.
night.
So about 2200 is when they departed out of French frigate Shoals for that last the 560-mile leg to Oahu.
Go back to our map. Oops, there you go. So that's a long piece of flying to get to French frigate Shawls, and then to get to Oahu. And that's just for those who are not familiar with French frigate Shawls. There's these magnificent spires that just come up within the atoll itself. That's 200 feet off the surface. So it's a very interesting place indeed to launch your flights from. So the approach.
The interesting thing I want to add in though is that the U.S. intelligence cast in the Philippines and HIPO in Hawaii had picked up some of these and deciphered some of these radio transmissions between 4th Air Fleet and 6th Fleet, the submarine group. And so they had already kind of deduced that maybe there was an operation going on that involved seaplanes and submarines and possibly seaplane tenders. And so they had kind of already deduced that, but unfortunately they didn't really put all that together until probably when the aircraft were already en route to Hawaii.
I see. Okay. And about what time did they arrive in the principal Hawaiian Islands? Like they approached Niihau and Kauai first, is that correct?
Yeah, so as they approached Hawaii, when they were at the time they had just made operational an SCR-71 permanent radar on Kauai up at Koki'i State Park and at the radar site there at Koki'i Park. And so that radar station actually picked up the two aircraft as they were approaching about 12:15 or about 15 minutes after midnight. They picked up the aircraft approaching from the west of Kauai. And so that was that information was sent to the information center at Fort Shafter. And so the interesting thing about that is that after the attack on Pearl Harbor, obviously with the Opana site picking up the flight of the first wave of attacking aircraft and the information not being disseminated, they really stood up the radar systems on the islands here. And so in order to provide all the manpower that they needed, they actually hired civilian women to man the information center. So they were the plotters. And so the radar stations were operated by military. And so when these two aircraft were picked up about a little bit after midnight, they reported that to the information center. And so the information center did not have any information on any approaching aircraft. And so in this case, unlike on the 7th of December, they launched P-40 Warhawks from Wheeler Field, 4 of them, to go out and try and intercept these intruders that were coming in. However, because the weather was poor that evening, or that morning, I guess I should say, the fighters were not able to spot the two aircraft. And the Navy also launched 5 PBY Catalinas, thinking that it was possibly aircraft launched from an aircraft carrier or a seaplane tender that was involved. And so they went out armed with torpedoes, looking for any surface combatants that may have been west of the islands. And so anyway, interesting that the Information Center and the Women's Air Raid Defense group were the ones that were working in the Information Center that worked with the radar operators and then with the launching of the aircraft.
So 3 months after Pearl Harbor, some lessons were learned. There was
Yeah.
there was an air defense a control center at Fort Shafter. There is a Army fixed radar search radar site on Kauai and one on
Yes.
Maui. Is that correct? Were they the same type of
Yes.
radar?
Both on Kauai and Maui were the permanent installations. Yes, not
Right.
not the mobile ones that were on Oahu.
As we have a photograph of the Opana Point mobile site. So still in its infancy, the radars didn't have identification friend or foe capability. They couldn't tell altitude, I don't think.
That's correct.
They could tell certainly size, and they could tell bearing for sure. So the Kauai radar sees them coming in the slot between Niihau and Kauai on their way to Oahu. Fort Shafter's alerted. And what was the female air defense component? What were they called?
The wards, or the Women Air
Ward.
Raid Defense. And so
Air raid defense. So
and
they
in
were
addition to the Kauai site picking them up, by the time they were about 20 miles from Oahu, the Opana site picked them up as well. So likely that's when they probably launched the aircraft. After the Opana site picked them up is probably when they launched the fighters.
And that was from the 46th Pursuit Squadron launching those P-40s. Again, they don't have radar, and the ability to vector fighters by radar to target is something that's still being learned and trying to be fully understood by the Army and the Navy at this time.
Yeah, exactly.
And then VP-21 launches their PBYs. And how many Catalinas launched out?
I believe there were 5 that they launched.
Okay, very good. So now then, so alerts going on, and we're looking for them. Does the defenders on Oahu, are they thinking aircraft carriers? Or they're not thinking like big flying boats, are they?
No, probably not. No, I don't think so.
All right. So then we have the track, there's some, I know there's some discussion historically about the approach that the Emily's took to Pearl Harbor. We have one that's been most commonly proposed. Can you talk a little bit about the actual approach to target and what happened when they got to Oahu?
So they got to Oahu about 2 o'clock in the morning. They were at an altitude of about 15,000 feet, or probably 5,000 meters for them. And so when they reached Oahu, the 2 flying boats, apparently Ensign Saseo did not catch the signal of Lieutenant Hashizume as far as turning on their final approach run. And so the 2 aircraft became separated at that point. And so it's my understanding from the information I've read that Lieutenant Hashizume basically did, because of the overcast and because he couldn't see the ground, he realized he was not going to be able to do a visual drop of the weapons. And so he did a dead reckoning calculation to the target area. And as far as Ensign Saseo, I believe he used the Kaina Point Lighthouse as a starting point for his dead reckoning to drop his bombs. But the 2 actually did their approaches to the targets separately. They were not flying together as was originally planned.
Okay. And again, so it was a well moonlit night, but we had an undercast at about 5,000 feet, and they're at what, 15,000 feet you said, or 14,000?
At 15,000 feet or 5,000 meters. And it would have been a waning moon that night. I believe the full moon was on the 3rd of March. So it was just slightly after the full moon. So it would have been a moonlit night It would have been probably good for them had it not been overcast. But unfortunately, although the Imperial Japanese Navy had broken the code for the weather transmissions that the Navy used, the Navy changed that code on the 1st of March. So they lost that capability of getting weather information from the U.S. Navy. And so they had also positioned or planned to position a submarine I-23 south of Oahu for two purposes: to provide air rescue, or I'm sorry, rescue capability in case one of the aircraft was shot down over Oahu and did ditch off Oahu, and also to provide weather information up to the minute weather information. But for whatever reason, I-23 was lost. All hands were lost. They lost communication. I believe the last transmission that they received from I-23 was on the 24th of February, so a week or so before the mission was flown.
So it never actually never arrived on its mission station then, and so that weather alert capability was not present.
To the best of our knowledge, no, it didn't.
Yeah. So the weather we do know, there was about a 45 knot or 45 mile per hour wind from the northeast. We call them the trade winds, blowing pretty strong, and it pushed those clouds over the Ko'olaus, and the whole leeward side of Oahu is got that undercast. So our first Emily does this turn, and he drops his bombs on Tantalus. Am I correct?
That's correct. So on Tantalus Slope, just a short distance away from Roosevelt High School, they fell into just a wooded area and didn't do any damage to anything aside from breaking a few windows in Roosevelt High School.
And our second Emily then drops their load outside the entrance to Pearl Harbor, supposedly. Is that correct?
But most likely, somewhere in the water, they were dropped probably south of Pearl Harbor.
Did civilian citizens or civil defense personnel or even military personnel hear the bombs go off?
I believe they did, but they were confused as to what the source of those bombs were. In some cases, it was suspected that maybe the U.S. military had some kind of an accident and dropped bombs there. There was a lot of confusion about where the bombs actually came from.
Okay, very interesting. Now, for those who don't know, let's see, I'll find that's the crater. It's a picture of our crater up on Tantalus. Oh, I'm sorry. Some tree damage that came through the forest, obviously, in Tantalus. More bomb damage. So it's for real. It wasn't make believe. It really happened. For those who don't know, that's Tantalus Peak. It's a high peak. It was a cinder of a volcano in ancient days, and it stands above the city of Honolulu in the vicinity of Roosevelt High School, and it's very pretty and green there. I can share with you that a few years ago, Ford Espagawa from our education department and several other Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum personnel went up Tantalus and did an exploration of the crater and found actual bomb fragments. So we have about 4 or 5 solid pieces of ordnance steel, real shrapnel from one of those 550-pound bombs that were in the remnants of that crater some 80 years later, found with a metal detector. Come visit us here at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, and you can see those artifacts on display. So,
and just to give some people some idea, that location where the bombs dropped was probably about somewhere close to 8 miles from Pearl Harbor, so it was a ways away.
yeah, it was a serious miss, right?
Yeah.
Very unusual, but it's just a very unusual kind of a situation. So then, but the fighters now there's 5 there's 5 mobile radar sites the Army has on Oahu. Are they seeing the Emilys, and is there some attempt to get the fighters back toward Honolulu?
I would like to think that's probably true. I don't have any information about what all took place as far as with the fighters as the Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft progressed over Oahu.
And then they departed back to to the marshals, correct? So
Yeah, so after the bomb drops, because the two were separated, and because of the cloud cover, they remained separated. And so when they turned back for that last leg, which was the longest leg of their flight from Oahu back to Wochi, their planned arrival point, uh, because Lieutenant Hashizume's aircraft had sustained some hull damage on its departure out of French frigate Shoals, he felt that it was wiser to continue to Jaluit Atoll, which had better maintenance facilities. So his leg back to Jaluit, which became the longest bombing raid or bombing mission ever flown at the time, about a little over 2,400 miles from Oahu down to Jaluit. And then Ensign Saseo continued on to Wochi, which was their original planned landing point, about a little over 2,200 miles down to Wochi.
just incredible ranges.
Uneventful flights back down there, but a very, very long flight, over 30 hours of flight time total that they flew.
And just incredible that they were able to, and then navigate, right? To back
Correct,
to
yeah.
those little places and then do their water landings. So very impressive. So Operation K then, so can we say, success or failure? We can talk about that, right? They certainly pulled it off and they certainly got over Oahu. Did they get any meaningful intel?
No, they didn't get anything.
Their bombs were ineffective. From the Americans' perspective, rather embarrassing. So, right, it's a mixed bag for both sides. So radar detects them, air defenses were activated, but gosh, totally missed them on their way in, missed them. They were flying right over Honolulu, missed them. And then they egressed and departed and returned safely all the way to the Marshall Islands. So mixed bag. I mean, you could say that the Japanese demonstrated the Imperial Navy could penetrate American air defense, and then the Americans could say, well, our air defense is a lot better than what it was just 3 months before. But there seems again, it seems to be a little bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, that's true.
Then Operation K then was more than just a one-time one-off mission, right?
It was.
They plan for more operations in the Hawaiian Islands with the Emily's. So what happens next?
So the next mission that was planned originally was on the 6th and 7th of March. They would reconnoiter or do reconnaissance missions over Midway and Johnston Atoll. However, because of the damage to aircraft Y-71, it required a couple of days for repairs, and because of the rest the crew needed from that very long mission, it was postponed until the 10th of March. But on the 10th of March, both aircraft launched again, this time with no bombs though. And because they weren't carrying the bomb load, they could do a round trip up to Midway and also Johnston Atoll without any refueling in between. So initially, Lieutenant Hashizume was tasked with flying a reconnaissance mission over Midway Island. And so Midway Island had been equipped with radar. And so as his aircraft approached Midway Island, the Army launched several Buffalo fighters. So that would be the F-2A Brewster Buffalo is what they
Marines,
launched.
Marine aircraft,
Marines, yeah, I'm sorry, the Marines.
21, VMF 221. So we want to make sure that we get credit to them. So Marine Air Group 21 and Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 221 with their Buffaloes. So they were there on Midway and radar saw them approach?
They did. And so the 12 Buffaloes were launched, and the division of 4 that was led by Captain James Nealis were the ones that actually had the air intercept of the Emily, and they were able to shoot that aircraft down with no survivors.
Oh wow, no survivors. And that was in Midway waters then?
I would assume it would have been south of Midway, most likely. I don't know the exact location of the shoot down.
So that's significant then. So that's a radar directed intercept that was successful with the shoot down of target. So that's
yeah. And I don't have times, but I'm assuming that was a daytime mission.
Right. And then how does this then how how does this then affect Japanese planning for the upcoming Midway mission? This is March now, so coming up in just a couple of months, it's going to be the Midway operation. So how does this affect
Yeah.
their
So in addition to the flight that Lieutenant Hashizume flew, Ensign Saseo flew a reconnaissance mission over Johnston Atoll, and he was successful in gaining a number of good photographs of Johnston Atoll. However, because the U.S. had kind of put together, had been able to, with their intercepted messages that they received from the Imperial Japanese Navy, they realized that the Emily's had likely refueled at around French frigate shoals. So they positioned two seaplane tenders, which were in essence World War I era destroyers that had been redesignated as seaplane tenders, and they positioned those around French frigate shoals. So when they reconnoitered French frigate shoals again, they realized that they weren't going to be able to fly a second mission to Oahu to help determine the location of the aircraft carriers prior to the Battle of Midway. And so they weren't able to gain any intelligence on location of the carriers prior to the Midway invasion plan.
Wow. So what was the biggest constraint for the Emily missions then? Was it was it the airplane itself, or was it like the lack of numbers of aircraft?
Probably, I'm not sure I really understand your question, but
Well, they were operating with two airplanes. Had they had, more, 5, 6, 7, would would there have been more successful?
Possibly, maybe so, but it all depends on what the weather was when they got there and those kind of things. So
Well, we have a question from one of our viewers, Scott, and it kind of goes along these lines. The weather skunked them on that March 4 mission to Pearl Harbor. Assuming that the weather was, the cloud cover wasn't there. How successful would that mission have been? What would they have been able to have accomplished?
Well, dropping bombs from 15,000 feet, I suspect if we, use it as an example, the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the armor-piercing bombs that were dropped from 10,000 feet, the accuracy was very low. So I'm not sure how accurate it would have been dropping bombs from 15,000 feet to actually hit the dry dock, which probably would have been the most substantial damage they could have done to the shipyard to prevent repair of ships. If they could have damaged that dry dock, it could have really set us back. However, at that point, we had already opened dry dock 2. It was almost completed at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, and then shortly after the Pearl Harbor attack, they began utilizing dry dock 2. But if they could have hit those dry docks, they could have really set us back. It would have required sending ships back to the mainland for the repairs that they would have needed.
What about the above ground fuel storage? Was that still a target? I know Red Hill was under construction at this time.
I don't have any information that indicates that they were looking to take out the above ground fuel storage.
Okay. And then what about just a pure reconnaissance collection element of the mission, which seems to be the primary mission, which seems to be reconnaissance?
Well, certainly before the Battle of Midway, if they could have determined the location of the aircraft carriers, that would have been a big help to them. Or the lack of the location of the aircraft carriers may have been also intelligence to some degree.
Scott, you and I talked a little bit before in that month of March. Can you run down again the disposition of U.S. Navy aircraft carriers that the Japanese were interested in? Where were they in that March?
So at the time of that mission on the 5th of March, the Yorktown and the Lexington were in the South Pacific. They were conducting raids on Lae and Salamaua in New Guinea around that same time frame. The Saratoga was still in the yards after receiving a torpedo hit in January, and the Enterprise was involved in the Marcus Island raid.
Right, so
the Hornet was not yet in the Pacific Fleet at that time.
And the Wasp also still in the Atlantic.
It's not in the Pacific Fleet yet.
Okay. And then so we've got several carriers then conducting fast carrier raids across the Pacific. And that was that setting the Japanese off? I mean, how was that? How is that affecting their timeline for either offensive operations or setting up their greater defense?
Well, I'm sure that the plans were already in the works for the Midway operation, and so if they had known that the carriers were away, which they were hoping for, that would have been beneficial to them. But since we were able to basically determine that they were going to attack and invade Midway Island, we quickly got carriers back to the Midway Island area in time for that raid.
Oh, this is a really good question. Very good questions coming from a viewer. These aircraft are so high. These Emily aircraft were so high tech and cutting edge. One was shot down. That what did the Imperial Navy think about the loss of these aircraft? Were they trying to husband their use and protect them, or were they prepared to expend them?
Well, I think that they built 167 of them eventually. So obviously they continued on with their plans. They did increase the engine horsepower on the later versions. They increased the gun emplacements or that they had on the aircraft. So they added additional guns from what the supplementary prototypes had.
Okay, and they improved the aircraft throughout the war.
Yeah.
And comparing one to like just to scale wise, it's they're similar in size to a PBY, except I think the hull is much taller and it actually might have more wing mass as well.
Yeah, 124-foot wingspan, 92 feet long. I'm not familiar with the dimensions of the Catalina off the top of my head.
We took a 1/72 scale models and compared them to do like a little Intel analysis of them. So it was very interesting, but a different design. It somewhat resembles a British flying boat, doesn't the MLA?
Yeah, the Sunderland flying boat was very similar in size and shape to this aircraft.
And are there any Emily's left for us to see?
So there was one Emily that was, there were several left after the war, but the US captured one of those and they put it on a seaplane tender and they shipped it back from Japan to Whidbey Island, Washington, which was a seaplane base at the time. They did some inspections of the aircraft there. They put US markings on it, painted out the Hinamaru on the side of the air and on the wings, and then they took it to the East Coast, where I believe the Patuxent River is where they had it. And during that time, they did taxi testing with it, and they did one short flight with it, but they lost an engine on that flight, and they had some other engine problems, and they were not able to get another engine for the aircraft. And so they gave up on the testing, and they shipped it back to Japan, and it was pretty much got in a pretty bad state of disrepair, and then it was restored with a really beautiful restoration. It's now located down in the southern part of Japan, is where the aircraft is. Kanoya Air Base is where they have it on display.
Wow. Now, in your own naval aviation career as a P3 patrol guy, do you wish sometimes on those 12-hour missions that you had a boat hull?
No.
So water landing was not something that you were looking forward to in a big airplane.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think so. But definitely your P3 experience is very much like these Emily crews and our own PBY crews in World War II. Very, long range over water patrol and reconnaissance and anti-submarine warfare, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
Very, very similar. Another question from a viewer comes in, two parts. Did Operation K end further attempts to invade Hawaii?
I'm not aware of any other attempts that they made to invade Hawaii prior to the Operation K, and maybe even a little bit after. There were submarines that did fire onto onto Oahu, as well as in California. There were some of those that went on, but I think as the war progressed, and particularly after the Battle of Midway, I think that the Japanese were more involved in things farther to the west, and probably not had any interest in trying to attack Hawaii again.
Absolutely. The Japanese ability to project power from the Marshalls and even from Wake toward the Hawaiian Islands is evaded and completely nullified by 1943. Midway's the high watermark of that. So remember, Midway's a part of the Hawaiian Island chain, and the capture of Midway in their operation wasn't just an in and of itself. The idea was to capture other islands in the chain and to put actual pressure on Oahu with air power. Maybe even, if you're, not that they would have been successful, but that was their plan to force
Yeah.
Canadians to fight an all-out fight to get some type of advantage. But after the Battle of Midway, and then everything happens at Guadalcanal, that shifts. It certainly was until January of 43. It certainly was something that was very realistic. And then that's the second part of the question was, did it make the Hawaiian Islands a great prize? And I think we would probably agree that it was. That's why they were coming here. But to force the U.S. Navy to fight, right? That was the wanting to destroy those carriers and establish their defense. And then
Yeah.
From your studies of those PBYs that we sent to French frigate Charles, they were looking for the Japanese fleet during the Battle of Midway. Is that correct?
Yes, they were. Yeah.
Oh, Scott, do you have any suggestions for reading about Operation K or reading about the Emily?
Well, I did just today see that there is a book written about that. And I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but I don't recall the name of it off the top of my head. But there was a book written about it, which I just, like I say, found out today. So I'm interested in maybe trying to get a copy of that and reading that book.
It's interesting. The only book that I've actually found where someone did some history on this is by Steve Horn, Horn. Name of the book is The Second Attack on Pearl Harbor,
That would be the one, yeah.
Operation K, and Other Japanese Attempts to Bomb America in World War II. I don't know if I can show that. It's a U.S. Naval Institute press book. And it's very, very good. We can talk about that. And, but other than specialized textbooks about Japanese aircraft, it's hard to find information on the Emily itself as a aviation project, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of is. Certainly there's a lot of models. There's models you can buy to build of the aircraft. So it's not unknown, but there's not a lot of information on it really that I found.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a unique aircraft, that range that it has, the restrictions that the material engineering restrictions that the engineers at Kawashino were working with, that came up with a really, really solid design. Scott, again, going back to your own patrol, Navy patrol plane experience, is there a role for large flying boats or even amphibious aircraft in the modern Navy today?
I think it may be coming back because the Japanese are actually building a flying boat again, and so I believe the Japanese military is purchasing some of those aircraft. So yeah, it may be that we see those again. I think obviously the corrosion issues involved with the aircraft in salt water is a big hurdle to
It's a
overcome.
big deal. Absolutely, absolutely. We have a question here from one of our viewers. How does the PBY compare to the Emily?
Well, the PBY is not as well armed as the Emily is. The Emily has a lot more firepower than the PBY. The Emily is certainly faster than the PBY. Range wise, I'm not certain. I'm guessing maybe the Emily has a little longer range than the
A little bit
PBY.
bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the thing about the PBY we could consider is that it's a middle middle 1930s design.
Yes.
And the Emily is an early 1940s design with everything that was new at that time incorporated. So it's like a half a generation newer, maybe.
Yeah.
I think. And one of the handicaps Japan had throughout the war, of course, was they're not able to build it in great numbers. Only 160 some odd aircraft. What a neat airplane it was. And then going back to Operation K and Midway, were there were the Emily's involved in Midway at all? You talked about going back to French frigate Charles and that mission being scrubbed, but what happens during Midway? Are there any Emily's out?
I'm not aware of any Emily's that were involved in the Midway operation.
Okay. And then for the rest of the war, they're just doing anti-submarine warfare and just patrol type missions.
I would assume that's probably true. Most of their missions probably in the South Pacific and that type of thing. Obviously, Truk was a very large base that the Japanese held, and most likely there would have been Emily's flying out of Truk and other areas around the Marshall Islands. So since the Japanese did, following World War I, the League of Nations did give them a big section of the Pacific, which included the Marshall Islands, with the exception of Guam.
And then another viewer question. I think we answered this a little bit earlier, but it's worth speaking again. Are there any Emily's left for us to go visit?
Just the one in Kanoya Air Base in Japan.
And that's the one that U.S. Navy captured, brought back to the USA, and then went back to Japan.
Yeah.
And that's what you see in pictures. It's very pretty rework on that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Scott, in your Navy aviation career, you operating with your P3s, you landed on and operated from some of these geographies, some of these locations that we talk about from World War II history, didn't you?
I've been to Midway many times. I've been to Kwajalein, been to Guam. So yeah, I've been to some of these places. Flown over French frigate shoals many times.
That right.
Been to Johnston Atoll. So
that's an operational backyard for you then.
Yeah.
Very cool. Someone's asking, why do we call Operation K the third Pearl Harbor attack? Well, it's the second enemy attack on Pearl Harbor, the first being 7 December 1941, and of course, this is 4 March 1942. But here at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, we in the education department, we talk about the first attack in 1932, which was a simulated attack during United States Navy Fleet Problem 13, when Admiral Yarnell put together the first fast carrier task force and launched a simulated attack on a Sunday before dawn on Pearl Harbor and Wheeler Field. And it was very successful. And this fleet problem and this action during that fleet problem was reported in newspapers across the United States. It had a prominent article in Time magazine. And we can only imagine that some very smart professional naval officers in the Imperial Navy took note of that and took it to heart. So that's what we called Operation K, the third attack on Pearl Harbor. We had a webinar just a few months ago that talked about Operation K. So we just thought we would, the people in the know would be happy with it. Fleet Problem 13 in 1932. Well, definitely. Scott, do you miss the Navy?
I miss flying.
You miss flying? Well, 28 years, very good. Where did you when you were a aviation machinist mate?
Correct. Yeah.
And a flight engineer. Where did you go to flight engineer school at?
So I did my flight engineer training in Moffett Field. Patrol Squadron 31 was the training squadron on the West Coast, and that's where I did my training. And then I was an instructor on the East Coast in Patrol Squadron 30. I did 2 instructor tours there, training new flight engineers.
And then, of course, was it Wing 1, Patrol Wing 1 was here at Barbers Point?
Patrol Wing 2, yeah.
2.
And then Patrol Wing Pacific later, or above that, so.
I remember back in those years walking out on the flight line and seeing like 50 P3s lined up out there. Was one of those
Yeah.
yours?
I didn't have a specific aircraft. We didn't, the aircraft were not assigned to specific crews in my era, but
All right. A great question. If you had the chance to be a flight engineer on an Emily, would you want to do that?
I think it'd be great. I would be interested in that.
I would too. I'd like to fly. I have an affinity for flying boats, and and I think that would be, it'd be pretty neat to be able to fly in a That'd be pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I would say though that being a flight engineer on an aircraft with reciprocating engines is a whole different skill set.
And that turbines, right? So fuel air mixture is a real big thing. Absolutely. Well, Scott, can you tell us what was your longest P3 mission? Can you share that with us?
13.8 hours was the longest flight I ever flew.
Wow, was that
As
an
far as without stopping. I did do over 15 hours, like 15.2 once, but that was with one fuel stop. So
and when you guys would go out there looking for Russian submarines, how long would those missions last?
typically 10 to 12 hours.
Wow. Wow.
But even more commonly, we did just surface patrol. So we would go out and just patrol to see what ships were around at the time. And those were typically 10 to 12 hours. And most of it low level.
Oh, that's always fun.
If we were looking at ships, surface ships, we would typically be at 200 feet.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. And then you were
And
telling me that you in your P3 you could throttle back and fly pretty slow and conserve some fuel.
so actually what we typically did on a tactical mission, we would shut down the number one engine to save fuel. If we were flying slower, then we didn't need as much total power to fly the aircraft. So we would shut down one engine to save fuel. And then sometimes if we really needed to save fuel, and once we got light enough, we would shut down a second engine, we would fly on two engines.
I don't think our Emily could do that, but
I don't know, they might have been
they
able to.
might have with just a fuel air mixture, just go really rich and maybe so. Well, this concludes our time together. Scott, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge of Operation K and just all things Navy patrol plane. Maybe you'll come back again and talk with us. We can just talk story about P3s and
Sure.
and what that was like. I would enjoy that, and I think maybe our viewers would too.
Well,
Um,
it's my pleasure doing this. I really enjoy talking about these things. So
Very good. So I want to invite everyone to come to the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, meet Scott, talk story about Pearl Harbor aviation history. Look for our Tantalus Mountain Operation K 150-pound for real bomb fragments that we have. We're the only ones that have that. And it's pretty neat to see. And again, for all of you, thank you for being with us and watching. We'll have another education program for you soon. Mahalo nui loa, a hui hou.